exciting to have you here. We appreciate it. Any good news moments that anybody would like to share with our group here and friends? Anything that's happening that you'd like to share? Talk about? Yes.
We had the Brazilian Festival last Saturday at the Orange Hall. We had about 400, between teachers and students, we had 400 people. And the Brazilian consul ambassador from Los Angeles was there, and she was just in love with our children.
That's awesome. Thanks for doing that festival for us. That's wonderful. Any other things that... Yes, Sherry.
On September 11th, we had the Department of Education Representative Jose Berna at Mill Creek. They asked specifically to see the immersion program, and so he spent the afternoon at Mill Creek. And,
that's great.
it was one of those things that they arranged right through Mill Creek, and Secret Service said we couldn't widely broadcasted, but there was some representation from USBE and
Awesome.
Governor's Office, and he spent the afternoon there. And he's very interested. I picked him up. He's very interested in dual immersion. That's why he'd asked. So apparently, Department of Education was doing a back-to-school tour, visiting a school in every state, and his primary responsibility is English language learners with the Department of Education. And he's very interested in dual immersion and wants, he said, at some point to develop some sort of federal grant program for dual immersion programs.
Wow.
Because he had asked his assistants, because I said, well, how did you choose Mill Creek? Because they didn't ask us, they just went right to the principal. And he said, I don't know, my assistant, but he said, I told her I wanted to see Spanish dual immersion programs. So he'd been to Arizona, Idaho, well, he's going to Colorado. There was like a stay today going to Colorado after he left here, but I think he was impressed, and it was a good PR for the school.
That's so great. Well, thanks for taking care of him. Congratulations. That's awesome. Any other things anybody would like to share?
Sure. I'm heading to China next week for the opening of a STEM Science Center that in Jiading District in Shanghai. They had a delegation come here in June, and they're wanting to build a sister community where we go beyond just sort of a school formality, sister school thing to actually curriculum-centered, productive type of relationship. And so this is the kickoff of the opening of their center there in Shanghai, and Tammy Gatz from STEM is going to go along and visit some of their science things there, but it holds a lot of promise for future opportunities for our students in Chinese and beyond, actually not just Chinese.
It's quite a statewide initiative, and we're looking forward to what Jiading Province can help us do in STEM and here for the Chinese students. It's great. So thank you. Else?
We have a good news moment for Rita's new position. Oh, and for anyone else who's new to our
I don't have a new position. Bonnie retired in the end of July, and so I'm taking over K-12 language instead of just
But
K-6.
you were awarded that, so you should be proud of that.
Oh, I was awarded it. I didn't know you became
You didn't quite see it that way.
I didn't. I can't take any credit for this because this was Bonnie, but our French students took the AP test for the first time this year, and all but one student passed, so it was like 95% pass rate. So
Wonderful.
that's her good news.
That's her good news.
That's Bonnie's good news.
I love it. So anybody who is here as a world language representative from your school district, first time? Share where you're from.
Yeah, my name's Jody Lindsay, and I'm with Alpine School District. And nice to meet you too. Jake Sigafus is the one who led before me, and I'm very happy to be here.
Great.
I'm Paula Slade. I'm from Murray School District.
Murray!
Yes.
I'm Ruth Ann Snow from Provo District, and I'm literacy curriculum specialist, but I've been asked to also oversee this. So. Glad to be here.
We're glad you're here. Thank you so much. Appreciate it. Anybody else? After the meeting or whatever, you'd like to meet other people, please feel free to just introduce yourselves. All who are on our DLI team, would you just raise your hand so you kind of know if you have questions? That's great. Fantastic. Awesome. All right. I've invited Carol Stevenson-Bullock from the NSA to come and present a program that she would like to introduce to our group. And let's just have her come up and we're talking from right there. I think the microphones, we're going to record this session for those who didn't attend, and we'll just send them out the YouTube link. They can access this meeting after. So Carol, please.
Hi, thank you for having me. Big fan of language. I am the HR director of the National Security Agency for Utah. We have a language center, which is now an operations center, so we're doing more than language, and the data center. That's my job. But at headquarters, we have a high school work study program. How many people are familiar with NSA and our programs and mission? What, a couple? Okay. So I have some handouts up here too. But we're located in Maryland, Fort Meade, Maryland, part of the Department of Defense and a member of the intelligence community. And we started high school work study actually in 1968. And back then it was just computer operators. But it grew into language and just, I think, the last 2 years for Chinese. And so we have our office in Hawaii that has Chinese high school work study and our office in Maryland. And I would love to be able to bring the program to Utah. And I'll talk a little bit about how that program works. I did have an opportunity to visit Wasatch Elementary right by BYU.
Yes.
Their Chinese dual.
I used to teach there, so it's a second grade English side.
Okay, I sat through a first grade, like all of the language leaders from headquarters, all the senior language authority came out and we got to sit through, and we actually had permission from parents to sit with first graders through parent-teacher conferences and then watch the classroom. Fantastic, absolutely amazing. And then at my language center, or our operations center, we hire full-time language analysts. And we have a number of different teams, but Chinese is where our growth is. So that's why we would like to reach out to the high school programs. And the way high school work study works, students apply between the 1st of September and the 31st of October, so the fall of their junior year, in order to work part-time during their senior year. And at headquarters, there are lots of different career fields that do this. In my case, in HR, we always had an office aide or a computer aide back when I worked at headquarters, and they would go to school half a day and work for half a day throughout the whole year, and then many would come on full-time. For language, we also have opportunities for summer. So let's say they go off to college and they're majoring in language. We have summer opportunities that are paid internships both here and in Hawaii and in Maryland. And we bring 200 to 300 students in each summer. And there are co-op opportunities now that were just brought on for Chinese as well. So if someone is majoring in university in Chinese, they can alternate semesters. So there are a lot of long-term opportunities, not just high school work study. But I wanted to provide some information to you today, find out if there's any interest from, in particular, the Davis County. I don't know if we have any
Very
representatives.
interested, yes.
Okay, so because these positions, we are moving the majority of our Chinese team to Hill Air Force Base. Monday, we're actually doing the ribbon cutting for a fabulous new, beautiful building. I was there last week. It's just gorgeous. So ribbon cutting is Monday. And I don't know what year, if you have seniors, because what I see on the website is junior high.
Our oldest students are in ninth grade.
Ninth grade, okay. So this is probably a little bit down the road, but it takes a while to get a program started, and that's why I wanted to reach out now for that down the road. So the students would actually be working at Hill.
That is fabulous.
And the way NSA works is everybody, including a high school work study, does need to get a top secret security clearance. So that is why the fall deadline is October, so that we can get them in for a polygraph. We'll fly them to Maryland, no expense to them. We'll fly them to Maryland, usually November, December. They do their polygraph, psych test, psych interview, and then we farm out the background investigators, or somebody will come here and talk with you as the instructor and the neighbors and any place they've worked to find out if they're clearable. So students are given a top secret security clearance, and that's why we have that fall deadline. So it would be fall of junior year, and they would be working senior year. So if they're in 9th grade, we have a little ways.
2 years.
Okay. Question here?
I was just going to say, I'm trying to remember the name, if it was David, who it was that contacted me from your agency about setting this up, talking about opening that next fall, that opportunity.
Yes. Lance
Lance.
Harvey.
Yes.
Yes. And your name is?
Stacy Lyon.
Oh, yeah, he gave me your name. Yes. Very good.
So that's sort of the target date for looking at that opportunity in Davis. Is that what I understand, or that's
Well,
just
he's
when you're
mentioning
gonna-
next year, but they have to be 16 is the policy, so it's their senior year. And if we don't have any seniors, unless there are other students,
Granite District would have Chinese students at that level.
but they don't want to drive to Hillel Force Base.
Some of them might.
Summer. Yeah.
For the summer, they would.
We don't have summer. The high school work study is during the school year, so it's in their school day. I think,
So
I have to do some research. I think there was a mileage, so I'd have to check the mileage. Yeah.
So juniors are 16. Could they not do it during their junior year as well?
Schools won't release them for first.
I'd have to go back to headquarters policy and ask. Maybe.
Just,
Okay.
so they could apply next fall
Right.
to do that.
And we would start really small, so if there are some older juniors, then that might work.
Okay.
Yeah. So I have a card here, and if you want to email me, we can be, and Stacy, I'd love for you to have cards here and information, yes.
So this is just for Chinese, or are you trying to expand for other languages?
Right now it's for Chinese only. I would envision it would extend, for our summers, it's Chinese, Farsi, Arabic, Turkish, Korean, and Russian. That's for college summers, but for high schoolers today, it's just Chinese.
What kind of work would they be doing?
They're doing real life top secret translation, transcription, and analysis.
Translation, transcription,
And analysis.
Analysis of what? Their transcriptions?
So, so what NSA does, we are a SIGINT provider, Signals Intelligence, and that's our primary mission. And so we are capturing foreign electronic communication signals and building intelligence reports. So we produce intelligence. It goes to the president every day, commanders in a battlefield, other agencies. And when we're collecting all of this information, obviously what we're collecting is in a foreign language. So we have many language teams that are looking through what we've intercepted and deciding what is intelligence worthy and what is important and what needs to be shared and what can be put into a report. So they're actually working on real stuff. I had summers recently that actually got feedback from where their reports went, and they went to the highest levels of the government. So it's kind of exciting when they get a little note back or they get feedback back that says, your report was used in the presidential daily briefing today. So it's quite rewarding, and that's one of our main retention points is that it's intrinsically rewarding. You're serving your country. You're not in the military, but you're serving your country and you're doing good. And we hear that from a lot of employees, why they've accepted the offer and why they remain.
So, sorry. So are the work study, is it paid work study?
It is, yes. With federal holidays, and they earn sick leave and vacation time.
So what is the probability that after high school they would stay on with the NSA?
It's up to them.
Okay.
Quite common at headquarters. I think with language folks, they'll probably want to go to school, and then maybe they would turn into our summer or our co-op. So absolutely a feeder program, because we do have summer internship opportunities, we have co-op opportunities, and then full-time opportunities. So certainly it's more of a career, not a job, if they so choose. Yes.
I was going to ask on the number of students you are hoping to have participate.
I have no idea. Most of our programs, we start with 1 or 2. My summers so far, I have had the maximum of 4 in any summer, and these are college students, usually going into their senior year. So largely depends upon the interest and the clearability. They have to get through that top secret security clearance. For our full-times, we depending upon the career field, we process 3 to 6 to get 1 hire, because people do fall out. Background investigation, polygraph, drug use, something comes up. So it's pretty competitive, yes. Any other questions? So I have handouts that explain foreign language and careers at the agency here, and specifically a few that have the high school work study on them. One question that one of my analysts asked recently was, the DLPT is traditional and simplified characters. Do any schools teach traditional?
Some of the, not DLI schools, I know that some of them introduce that at the high school level.
Okay.
For immersion, we're simplified.
Okay. That was one area that we had questions on. And then another question for you as language resource folks. Does anybody do Star Talk? The NSA grant? Okay, because it's open right now. I just wanted to put a plug in for that program as well. And all that can be found on our website, which is on all of our forums, but it's intelligencecareers.gov or nsa.gov. So I'd love to meet with folks that are interested in the program. I will come to your school, sit down with you, and we can get some questions answered and go from there. Again, my card's here. Carl has my contact information. I live here in Park City. I work in Draper, so I'm going in and out of Salt Lake all the time, and am happy to meet with you, answer questions, or you can email me, call me, text me. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. Exciting for opportunities for our students. It really is. Thanks, Carol.
Thank you.
I've asked Sharon Gracia to come and share with us kind of Granite School District seal of biliteracy process that they use, and some information of languages that they have. So we'll just turn the time to Sharon. Bring it up here, that'd be great.
Oh, but, yeah, this is mine. I would like to read. Hi, everybody. So Carl asked me to talk a little bit about what we do in Granite, like what is our process, what do the students do, what do we do, what's our data, what does it look like compared to last year and the year before, and things like that. So, okay. Well, I think the important thing is that you first understand the key people that make this work, so that if you're starting in your district or if it's not working really well and you need some, it's good to know what maybe a big district is able to do with their personnel. Maybe if you're a smaller district, you won't be able to do some of these things, but these are some of the people that make this function. I just don't want you to think that this is me doing all of this, because this is not. This is a lot of people working together. And I would say that the biggest group is the counselors. If they are your friends, you'll be okay. So my suggestion is whatever you do, don't put too much of a burden on them, because at the end of the year, they're pretty burdened as it is. So whatever you can do to take on some of that, or a lot of that, and make it minimal work for them, then they will work for you, and they'll be an advocate for this. The assessment department is who funds everything, our testing and everything, and so they're our friends, and for now, and I'm going to try and keep that relationship as good as possible so that they can continue to fund it. And equity helps us having access to students that are ELs, are Ls. The printing department is good to have on your side when it comes to printing a whole bunch of letters to send out to the students. Testing center, to be able to test the students. The world language chairs, also very helpful to have their voice in it. And Dr. Fernando Rubio has been very helpful for Granite and for everybody, but I'll explain all of these and how they all work into it in a minute. And then information systems, who actually loads everything up to the transcript. So those are all the people that are part of this process in Granite. So the first thing that we have to do, or that I have to do, is to compile all the data. And so what I do is our assessment director, he actually emails me in a password protected file
with all the student data, all of the seniors. The first tab, I need to show you that, is all the seniors in the entire district and all of their ACT scores and the SAGE score in the past. So I would take that file, and it's really easy if you use Excel, and I would just sort and then color code anyone who got, and I put at the top of this file what they need to get on the different tests so that it's easy for me. So if they got an 18 or above, then I just made it in green. If you sort it, then it's really fast and really easy. And for the SAGE, it was being proficient or above. So, and then you can, if you're using Excel, you can resort that by school or however you want to do it, alphabetical, by last name, etc. Then I would also get the WIDA scores. The first year I had to get those from our Ed Equity department, but the second year they were able to pull it from the assessment department. They were able to pull that into the same document, which saved time, which was great. And then this last year, we actually had a few students that did not have a high enough score on the ACT or on the SAGE, and they were second language learners. Their first language was Spanish, their second language was English. So they took an APPLE test and were able to qualify for the seal through the APPLE test. So that's another thing that you want to put into your spreadsheet. Then once you've done that, then you have to find out which ones qualify already in a second language. And so then I would access the AP scores for anyone who took an AP test before their senior year, because obviously if they're seniors at this point in the juncture, they haven't taken the test. So I'm looking at past AP scores of kids who are currently seniors. And last year I was able to pull 20 kids off of that had already taken an AP. And I'm going to have a lot more than that now that we've got the bridge kids coming up and we've got the dual immersion kids. In our district, they're seniors this year, our first group. So we have 2 schools that have seniors. So that's going to make that a larger list. And then I would just move them into a file that says qualified for the seal. So I have moved all the ones that qualify in English, and then once they qualify, then I just move them, and that makes it really easy for me to compile the data and keep it organized. Then the second step would be to get the word out, and this is really key. You've got to have a lot of people knowing about this, especially if it's your first year. Your very first year, I mean, I did a whole lot more that first year because we didn't get approval from our district till January. To make that happen by May was quite the experience, just doing everything we could. But now it's a little bit easier because the counselors know. But I would suggest you meet with your counselors a few times at least. I was lucky to be invited this last year by our counselors, maybe because the first year they realized how much more information they needed and they would have liked to have had before the school year started. So they actually have a 2-day conference before school starts, and they invited me to be in the rotation. So I saw every single counselor except one who was absent. So every single counselor, I had a 15-minute discussion with them and walked them through the website and showed them how to find everything so that they could then take that back to their students and help them with that. So then I keep contact with the lead counselors through email, and I go to their meetings. They have meetings. I've been to 2 of those just to remind them and to be able to field questions and keep them understanding and answering questions so that they have the right information to give to the students. The very first year, I also sent a letter out to all the counselors and to the ALP leads, letting them know what the seal was about so that they have that knowledge. Then also what you can do is you can write up, what we did is write up an explanation for the career and readiness booklet that the counselors give the students. It's kind of has all the graduation requirements, all of the diplomas and all the different things. It's in there so that they're aware of it as well. Meet with your world chairs. I'm sure you already do that, but making sure that they are aware of it and you can field their questions so that they can also take that out to their students. Again, you're just trying to get the word out to everybody and to keep them current with information. I actually had students this year for the first time call me in the summer and say it's not on my diploma. And Granite doesn't put on the diploma, we just put it on the transcript. They didn't want to start putting things on the diploma and have it cluttered up and then have everybody else want to put things on the diploma. So they wouldn't let us do that, that's fine. So it's on the transcript. Besides, when you apply to a college and you go to a job interview, you don't take your diploma, you take your transcript. So this is where it is. So that was a miscommunication by some teacher somewhere because they said their teacher told them that. So trying to keep that information. And then this is a really helpful thing is to have your information on the website, your district website. So these are just screenshots because I wasn't sure if I was going to have internet capability. So it's just on our world language page, which is on the curriculum page, and then world languages. It explains how it started, why, what is it, why. because that's the question that comes up. Why get a seal? Because parents want to know, well, what's the point, you know? And so if you have an explanation as to why you should get a seal, what the benefit is for the students, I think that's helpful as well. These little images are not on the website, they're just links for me. So then I put on that website all the information they need, which is I have a seal of biliteracy checklist. So the students can print that out and just walks them through. And the first thing it says is, am I a senior? If no, then wait till you're senior to apply. Because I just can't handle more than seniors right now, because it's just me processing it all. I hit the stock like this last year. So if yes, then go on to the next question. Are you on schedule to graduate? Gives them the responsibility to check and make sure they're on schedule to graduate. They've done all their credits, they're passing the classes. Do I meet the English criteria? That tells them what they need to do to find out if they meet the English criteria. Do I meet the world language criteria? If yes, then here's what you do. If no, if I'm a native speaker, here are all the steps, all the kinds of tests, how to sign up, who to call, etc. And then once you've met the criteria, what do you do? How do you apply? Where do you, what do you fill out? What are the deadlines? And then the other two pieces of information they need from the website are the actual application. So that's there for them to look at, again, with all the information they need on there. And then the lines of evidence that are acceptable. It looks like you had a couple more on the one in the packet that I need to add on there. HSK. But we discovered last year World Speak, which was from Avant, which was helpful because we had a Vietnamese student that wanted to test. That was one of the tests we did not have a test for. So you should check, if you look on, I sent that to Carl, so he put it on your list. You can see what languages it encompasses. Let me show you why this is important to have some of those, because we have, I put it on.
Sharon, do you have the students pay for their own testing, or does the district pay?
No, the district pays. For all of us agreed to pay. But you'll notice, let me go back to that for a second. Well, you probably can't notice because it's really small. But at the bottom, like all these ones that are starred, at the bottom it says, during the 2018-19 school year, Granite District will cover the testing costs of these tests. They won't pay for the AP or the IB test, but they cover the other proficiency tests. I put that on there because every year I don't know. So every year I have to just change that and hope that I can get that blessing again and to get that funding. So far, so good. So far, this is the third year we're going into, and they've still agreed to pay for it. If it gets really big, which we want it to get big, we may have to look for other funding sources. But as of right now, they're willing to even pay for an OPI. And I told them how much it is. So I have that in my back pocket just in case, but I'm trying to find ways that are not OPI, just because it's so expensive, because I don't want them to start turning, it becoming so expensive that the assessment department says I can't do it. So anyway, and then this just goes back to the webpage that has, again, the dates. The ASL FII is the ASL test that we are using currently until Apple comes out with one. I know that they're working on it. They haven't finalized it yet, but this is done by UVU, and the guy who heads it up is an OPI rater. He's trained in it, and he has a team that they work with ASL. In fact, they've been really helpful because they actually come up to Granite and do Skyline, because Skyline is a really active program. They will come up and schedule the day and just do the kids all 1 day, 2 days, bring a whole team up, which is wonderful because they get done really fast.
How do you schedule, who administers these other tests? So let's say you've got someone who wants to do the tribal language test. How do you do that?
Okay, so hang on. I will. Yeah, I will. Okay, so I promise. So I would be careful not to give that link out to your people if you're taking any notes on this, because that link, aslfii.com//Granite, was specifically set up for our district. Because we pay for it, our district pays for it, that's a way, because if you go in and just sign up for the ASLFII, it requires you to pay for it. The student would have to pay for it. So because we pay for it, we set it up with the company that they would set a special link for our students, and then they would just register without having to pay for it, and then they send us the bill. So that's why that link, and you can do the same thing. They will do the same thing for you. If you guys are paying for it, then it's helpful to have that. So, have hyperlinks all through this thing, so I have to remember where I put them. Okay, another thing to do for getting the word out is an EduLink. I don't know what you guys use if you have some type of a phone system that sends out messages. It would be a really wise idea to send a message home in English and any other major language that you've got in your district to parents of seniors, so that they just get the message. That's just another way to contact them. The first year, I also sent a script to high schools that they could use on their announcements, because I was trying to get them in between that January and May time. I'm like, here's an announcement you can make. I mean, I was trying everything I could. And then the final thing, which is probably the most effective, of course, would be sending letters to students. So what I do is I have 2 letters. One says, congratulations, you've met the criteria to receive the Utah Seal Violation. That means those 20 students that already met the seal, they got a letter that says, you've met it. So here's what it's going to look like on your transcript. Here's what you need to do. You just need to apply. I mean, I could just award it, but I don't want to do that. I want to know that they're really interested, and so I want them to apply, because it's important to them. And of the 20, most of them applied. I actually had a couple that did not. I'm just like, I got on their counselors, and the counselors were calling them like, hey, but you know what, at this point, if they don't want it, they don't want it, it's fine. I'm not gonna force it on them. So, and then this one says, you've met 1. That means I took that file of the 1,792 students that met the English criteria for Granite, and sent a letter for every one of them that said, you've met the English. This is where the printing services is helpful. And I actually printed them, and we didn't mail them. We sent them to the counselors, and they divided them. And I asked them ahead of time. I went to their meeting. I said, "This is what I want to do. Are you okay with it?" And they were very supportive. Again, because I'm trying to take as much responsibility away. And it was early enough in the year that they weren't going crazy. So it was a good time. I did it in January. I think I want to do a little bit earlier this year, like in November. But it was good. So they went through, and I sent them to the school. And then the school subdivided them by the counselor, and then they just called the students down, or I don't know how they did it, or they sent them out to the different classes. But then every student that met the English criteria then had the instructions of what to do to qualify for a second language. If their second language, actually, if English is their second language, and they speak a native language, or they're taking a class. Now, we only pay for the tests if they're in a level 3 or above. And the reason why we do that is because even a level 3 is most likely not going to qualify, because our target for level 3 is intermediate low by the end of the year. So intermediate mid is what you need to get a seal by literacy. So we figure they probably won't, but when you get a rock star teacher like we have some of those, and we have some very motivated students, it is possible to get a level 3 and to be able to get an intermediate mid. And so we will pay for anyone who's in level 3 or above. Other than that, they want to take it. I had somebody call me, they're in a level 2, and I said, okay, well, the district won't pay for that test, but you're certainly welcome to take it. And if you qualify, then great. But that was the one stipulation that we put on it. So, and then now that the students have all the information, they need to be tested, then we go to the testing questions. So we have a testing center. It's pretty small. It's just this little building that has maybe 10 computers in it. And at the end of the year, it gets really busy with demonstrated competency testing and online tests. There's all sorts of stuff going on. So in the letter, the original letter, I say, if you're a native speaker, please test early. Didn't happen last year, but I'm going to keep trying. Because if they're a native speaker, they don't need to wait till the end of the year till they've had their whole level 3 class they should just come test. So I had a few call, but then they didn't end up testing, and I was a little frustrated. But that's okay, I'll just keep getting the word out. So what we decided to do this year, working with our testing center, she's now an associate director, we decided to set up satellite testing centers. So that means at the high schools, we're going to work with the world language teachers, and we're going to pay them a stipend to be able to offer, to stay after. They can pick the dates, they set up the dates, and then we'll organize that, and we'll teach them how to give the Apple test. Or the stamp test, or whatever test you're using. That way we can do, like Taylorsville did that last year, and Taylorsville was a good school to do it because there's a lot of native speakers there that wanted to test. So the department chair, Ryan Wells, was willing to help. Bless his heart, he's willing to do anything for those kids, and that's the way it should be. But I'm going to meet with my department chairs early this year again, and I'm going to try and get more people to be involved with that. If they can find just 1% of their school that's willing to do maybe a couple of days to offer those to students, and then to work with their LMETs. And again, we've got the funding, the testing, the assessment of, well, actually, it was the testing center these days. The stipend. And that was worth it for them. So for each testing, so who, I do.
So you find out who wants to take which test, you register them.
Right. So let me get to that. I'm getting there. I'm sorry. No, you're good. That just tells me what you're interested in. Actually, if you don't ask, then I won't know if you have a question. So that's the next thing on here is to order the test. So I order the tests because it gets more complicated. Our testing center person, like I said, it's a small testing center, and I don't want to complicate things for her. So I order all the tests. Besides, then they come, like I'm attached to it, so all the invoices come to me and I know who to give them to. Like, is this an assessment? Is this, who's gonna, that's always say something. So I'll do that. I order all those tests. For Apple, if you've never done it, it's really pretty easy. I just keep a template on my desktop and I just throw the names in and then I just send it out. It's really easy. And World Speak, we had to go through a process because we hadn't done that one before. We had to get it approved. Because it was a little bit more expensive, and there's just a process with every new test. You have to see what it is for your district. But if you go back to the list, if you've got Apple and Stamp and World Speak, ASLFI, those aren't, the students do the ASLFI because they actually register, but they don't have to include very much information. It's pretty simple. So far we haven't had any. We had one language last year asked for, which was Ukrainian, and we were working on finding some people to train on that, but then the student never, we actually had a Bosnian too. Fernando Rubio trained somebody for Bosnian to assess them, and then the girl never. I called her personally 3 times. I was like, we just paid for you. Okay, whatever. You do. You can only do so much. So anyway, I already told you about the SLFI link. And then the UU project, it's really a project with Dr. Rubio, because bless his heart, he is so supportive of this. We met with, who all was in that group? We had some really important people from I don't even remember where they're from. I should have taken
so many people, yeah.
There are some people in this meeting. We had outreach groups and working with refugees. And they wanted, this is where our Nepali voice came in. We have a large Nepali community in our district, and this, I'm sorry, I feel horrible that I don't remember who all these people were. But the advocate for them had said that they were really asking for, they wanted to test for the seal of biliteracy, and we didn't have a Nepali test, and so we were looking into options of being able to help those kids. So this meeting was to try and find funding and find ways that we can increase the number of tests of languages that are not normally tested. And so Dr. Rubio was in that meeting as well, and immediately we started working on trying to figure out what we could do to help some of the students in Granite. So let me just show you, this is what I was going to show you before. I brought this because Carl wanted me to, and I can send it around. This is just the first page of 3 pages of the languages that are offered that people speak, their first language in Granite. I organized them by number of students that speak it. And I thought, okay, if we're going to start figuring out which ones we need to target, we're going to take the top 10 and just start there. So obviously Spanish, we've got all sorts of tests to Spanish. And Vietnamese, we've got one now. So this is basically Apple, Stamp, AP, a writing proficiency test, and the OPI. So if my plan is if there isn't a test, that we figure out how to do a WPT and an OPT. Basically the oral and the writing. Doing the oral, you're doing listening as well, so I'm thinking that's something we can get. And I got blessing from the state office, so thank goodness. So looking at what the options are, I went through all the different languages offered by Granite to see what tests were available. And so this is the Avant World Speak. I can't find the document to update it, so I have to do it with pen. But right now, we have a test now for Samoan. We've got a person trained in Samoan, Nepali, and Bosnian. Those are ones that we now have tests for. So we're trying to nibble away at those top 10 for Granite. And then try to get the word out to those students so that they know if you are a native speaker of these languages, then we can test you for the bilinguality. The experience I had last year with the Nepali students and when I talked to the Bosnian student, which is probably why she didn't take the test, is that they were very, very good at speaking it, but being raised here, they were not comfortable writing it. But when we tested the Nepali speakers, they were really close. And one of them was really good at the writing, but her English writing wasn't, or her English writing was not high enough. So, or her English ACT was not high enough. So I taught them, they were juniors. I said, you've got another year. Here's what I want you to do. And so they're going to work on it and then retest. Or this year to see how they do things. So, working on it. AP and IB test results don't come till July. So on all my documents, I tell them, I remind them that. I said, you can put on the application pending results and turn it in. And then I'll hold on to it, and when those results come in, the problem is they can't be recognized at graduation because we don't have the results by graduation. So I tell them, your results won't come till July. If you'd like to be recognized at graduation, you want it on your transcript before you leave the school, then take an Apple test. You can pass an AP test, you're going to probably pass the Apple test, I'm sure. So I tell them that, and then I leave it up to them, put it right back in their lap. And I already told you about the assessment. They're so great that they pay for all the testing, thank goodness. And then the next step is to print the results. So again, since I'm the contact for all the testing, all the results come to me. So then once I check and I get the results, then I print them out, I put a little letter with it that says, congratulations, you scored high enough on your test, you get the seal by literacy. This one says, this is my sad letter, but it says, thank you for your interest in pursuing the Utah Seal by Literacy attached to your Apple results. Proficiency level needed to qualify for intermediate mid in all areas tested, while your presentational writing score was an I5, does qualify, well done. Your interpersonal listening and speaking was an I2. So I kind of let them know why they didn't, and then I try to encourage them to stay with language in these paragraphs. Here's why it's still important. If you're doing a good job, keep going. So I'm trying to keep them positive that even though they didn't get the seal, that there's still hope in the future for things.
And are you going to share this letter and the other 2 letters you send out with, here's what you are, if we even...
Sure, if you don't,
we won't send them out on your letterhead.
Yeah, no, I'm self-conscious about that, because you guys are like all experts, and I'm not, anyway. Yeah, I will send them to Carl. And then send a list to the counselors so that they know who's qualified, so that you need to do that so they can recognize my graduation, because then I just leave it to them to make sure that they get that, do whatever they're going to do. And then I send a list, that same Excel spreadsheet, I just do everything in that. And then I just send that Excel spreadsheet with just information they need. I cut out all the extra fluff stuff that helps me organize to information systems, and then they can do it. And it doesn't take them very long. They load it, and this is what it looks like on the transcript. So they have their pages of all their classes, and the very end shows their testing scores, and they put it right at the end. And this particular student got it in 2 languages this year. He got it in Chinese and Spanish. So, and then here's Granite's data. So you can see we had a 63% increase between the 2 years. So this shows you the schools and what how many. I'm telling you, most of those are ASL. You would think I'd get more languages out of Skyline, but I get mostly ASL because the teacher is she's a go-getter, and she's a great teacher, and she just really encourages those kids to take a test. And this tells you the languages that we've given them. And then this is the multilingual recipients, because Carl wanted me to let you guys know about that. We had one the first year that got it in Spanish and Chinese, and then last year we had 3 get it in ASL and Spanish, and 1 get it in Japanese and Chinese. And she was not a native speaker of either of those. She was an English speaker.
That's great.
Yeah, it's really awesome. So I think that's it. Any questions?
It's amazing how much of a difference one person
How
makes.
did I just connect?
You find the little thing and say stop.
Got it.
Excellent. Excellent. Thank you, Sharon. Any questions for Sharon before she sits? our agenda is Dr. Johanna Watzinger-Clark, and going through physiological targets and also kind of the benchmarks. So it's what I'd like to do is kind of give you a before her presentation attitude that I'd like you to look at it and review. What we've done is we've gone through the data, we've looked at it very carefully, we have created the document, we want to present it to you and kind of show you the rationale behind it. This is not a permanent document, everything is dynamic, it's movable. But my purpose in doing it this way, and then having discussions after, is I wanted you to have kind of step back from your passion and your role and your long experience in proficiency and all of those pieces to really just look at the data, look at the expectation. We know that the original expectations as far as the benchmarks and the targets were truly aspirational. So we're looking at the data now to really take a look and see what's really happening with students. So if we'll do that, and then over the next month or two as we have discussions in our DLI team and world language, if you want to have input on those, I'm ready to take that input and we'll continue to make decisions together. But I did it in this format because I've received some feedback of I feel left out, type things. I understand that, but it was on purpose so that we get that step back and look at the data, step back from the emotional, I've invested these many years and how dare you change this type thing. It's just a revision and I want to just spend some time stepping back. Now, also, as part of this, Dr. Watzinger-Tharp, Dr. Rubio, and Dr. Tharp, and the other Tharp, wrote an article in the Annals, and I have it here for you to review and to look at. This is all of the data that we're talking about. So I'll just go through, and if you want to come on up, Johanna, and get started, that'd be great, and we can review this and go through it together.
I assume you're talking about Apple data?
Yes, Apple.
Thank you so much, Carl, for inviting me. And I just want to emphasize that I'm here representing both Fernando and myself. So Fernando was just mentioned also, and he and I have been working together for a while now on proficiency, on Apple data and the performance of the DLI students. And Carl, thank you for distributing the article. The article relied on data from earlier years. What we're talking about today are more recent data, but we of course took into account earlier data. So as Carl said, we spent quite a bit of time looking into the data and came up with the revisions in the document based on the data, but also on a lot of kind of the contextual factors come into play in setting the benchmarks and the proficiency targets. So these are just there to look at, and they'll come up throughout my presentation. But then at the end, we're going to look at these factors again. I think they're really critical. I mean, we all know how important context is, and the context in which this program takes place is very complex, and a lot of different factors that come into play. And we certainly discussed those quite a bit as we were looking at the benchmarks and the proficiency targets. the purpose and goals, this is what Carl just alluded to, what is the history of these proficiency targets and benchmarks, how were they established, and why is it important to revisit them now? There's a really important distinction to be made between performance and proficiency, and the assessments that focus on performance and the assessments that actually measure students' proficiency. We're going to just take a brief look again to remind everybody the nature of the actual scale and how it's supposed to play out. The assessment types and schedules play a really, really important role. When are we doing assessment? What kind of assessments are currently used? When are students assessed? And then I put that sort of in the center, the data evidence. What kind of data do we actually have? It's also important as we look at the benchmarks and targets that we're grouping languages and that the student populations can vary quite dramatically. Similarly, we have lots of between school and between district differences. And then finally, when we talk about DLI, making the distinction between what's truly a dual language immersion, 50-50 Utah model, and then the DLI continuation and how much exposure to language students will actually have in the secondary DLI continuation and then in our very unique bridge program. Okay? So I want to emphasize, just like Carl, that we're not here with any agenda. Your investment is probably a lot larger in it now, but having spent a lot of time with the data, I'm a little bit invested as well. But your investment, of course, over years, and I understand there's a lot that comes into play. So what we're presenting now are some considerations, data, and then recommendations based on that are open then for conversation and discussion and input, because compared to many of you in the room, still feel quite new to the game of the DLI program, all the teacher education that comes along with it, and not to mention last but not least all the politics that come with it, right? Everything seems to be political these days. All right, so this is the context, and then I wanted to first look at the way in which we measure performance and proficiency and make a distinction. So a performance measure looks at the ability to use language that has been learned and practiced in an instructional context, an instructional setting, and is used within familiar contexts and content areas. That means for performance assessment, students are prepared. From the instruction, it's a performance on a task, and the students know that's coming. In proficiency, we measured the ability to use language in real-world situations and spontaneous, unrehearsed context. So a very different measure. And the spontaneous and unrehearsed real-life context is really different from an assessment that measures performance. So what are the implications of that? When we look at performance scores versus proficiency ratings, we have to make a distinction. And usually what that means is that a student might perform at a higher level than their proficiency score will ultimately show. It also means that, and the article showed that very clearly, that there is a big difference between linguistic growth and then actually level or sub-level gains, right? We found a lot of student growth that didn't show up from going from one sub-level to another, but students always grew at incremental levels. But that doesn't necessarily manifest itself in a sub-level gain. And that also means that the proficiency targets we look at, it's no coincidence that there might be a sub-level target that shows up at multiple grade levels. That doesn't mean students stagnate. It just means that students grow linguistically, but it's not actually manifested in a sub-level gain. So those are really important implications, especially for the proficiency targets, because the proficiency targets and the performance benchmarks differ in one very important point. Goes up. No, it doesn't.
On the screen.
Not on the screen. Okay. So this is a good way to look at the performance scale and the performance apple measure. Okay. So what you see here is that the intermediate scale that in the actual proficiency guideline has 3 levels, as you well know. In the apple, it actually has 5. So the intermediate range, I2, I3, I4, is stretched out to account for the fact that students at the intermediate level move slowly through the level. It takes a lot more time than getting through the novice level. And we still want to sort of note gains by looking at this particular scale. So a student from intermediate low to intermediate mid to intermediate high in the actual proficiency will stay at the intermediate mid level without really noticing a difference in score. In the Apple scale, you might see a difference in score. Okay, so the Apple measure that we use for to inform the benchmarks are sort of are modeled after the proficiency guidelines, but they're for a different purpose, and they're adapted to the fact that our focus is often really the intermediate level, and we want to measure gains at that level. So that brings us to the nature of the scale, and you see that the proficiency scale is very different, is very similar, except that the levels, the sub-levels are all the same, whereas for the performance scale, the sub-levels in the intermediate range are different. One important element of the proficiency scale that is really important to keep in mind is how it looks at the thresholds. So an intermediate high speaker can handle a substantial number of tasks associated with the advanced level, but they're unable to sustain performance of all of these tasks all of the time. Okay? And then there's a description of what an intermediate high speaker can do: narrate, describe in all the major time frames, connected discourse, paragraph lengths. Okay? So the point I'm trying to make here, and it'll come up again later, I'm sure, is that on an Apple performance, a student might be rated as intermediate or as advanced, because in that performance, they're at that level, and they've practiced that level. They are actually demonstrating that they can perform at that level. But if they were to take a proficiency assessment, they might have the same profile, still the same student, but they would more likely to be at novice high rather than intermediate, or at intermediate high rather than advanced. So it's a really critical distinction between students being able to perform at a certain level, and if they're at that threshold, if they're unable to sustain doing it all for all the tasks, all the time, they're not going to be at that higher level, but being rated novice high, intermediate high means that a substantial number of tasks are at that higher level. And that was a really important consideration for how we are looking at when we compare the benchmarks and the proficiency targets. Okay? So this is background, and now just kind of talk about how the performance benchmarks and the setting of these benchmarks and targets, how they're set is actually also really, really different. Okay? Performance benchmarks are set according to the testing schedule. So we have performance benchmark for those grade levels where we actually test. Okay? Very clear connection between the testing schedule, when students are tested, and what the benchmarks are. So for ILS, 5th grade for the alphabetic languages, and for IL1. And we can rely on a summative assessment, which is the output. Okay? We have data, we get the results, we have a summative assessment, everybody takes it, and then we have a very clear data evidence for setting benchmarks. The proficiency targets are really different. Okay? First, at every grade level, we rely on formative assessments, right? We take the Apple data as an indicator, but we have no summative proficiency assessment in the DLI program. There are no data that tell us where students are, except for the lingua folio, the assessments that happen formatively in the classroom. Okay? So we're kind of operating in an aspirational environment, and that's a really important thing to have. The proficiency targets are critical, but we have to take a lot of factors into account in the absence of real data. We do not have proficiency data. We put in for a grant starting next year that would provide funding for actually doing OPI testing. If we get it, we will be in a position. If not, I think there has to be a conversation about proficiency assessment, especially in the grades either right around the AP testing, but particularly in the language program. Okay? So that's really important. We do not have proficiency data. We have indirect measures. We do not have direct measures. Okay? And then I think it's also the purpose and goals of the benchmarks, and this is where I'm hoping I'm interpreting all these very complicated elements correctly. We do have an explicit goal of 80% meeting and 50% exceeding the benchmark. I'm not sure there is such a clear goal set for the proficiency target. Are we expecting 50% of the student meeting the target? Early on, maybe 20%, increasing to 50, also 80%. Are these targets set for the broad general population, or again, is this aspirational for sort of students who have been able to pursue an optimal path? Okay, so the benchmarking takes into account that it's a program for all students, K9, DLI program for all students, right? Is that true for what follows? And to what extent can we expect students to be able to pursue what I would consider the optimal path, which is DLI 50-50 through elementary, DLI continuation consistently with 2 courses in 7th grade, in 8th grade, 9th grade AP plus another course, and then 3 bridge courses. That's the optimal path. Is that going to be the path for the majority of the students? So these are the factors that we discussed as the context and background. So in a sense, that means that this complex picture here is a balancing act between aspirations, expectations, and evidence. And I think it's been an amazing thing how much that balancing act has worked. But as the numbers increase, as it's going to be scaled, bigger and bigger yet, with more students, lots of different student populations, differences in teacher quality between schools, all kinds of factors.
Course-taking patterns.
Course-taking patterns, exactly. Okay, I think it's going to require revisiting, especially the sort of aspirations in conjunction with evidence and what kind of realistic expectations we can have of the students. All right, so there were some very specific benchmark changes. I want to go through those just to show kind of how we went about setting the benchmarks. There are also a little bit of, mostly based on data evidence, but there's an aspirational element there as well, and we'll come to that. So the main changes were they were in the Chinese, in the interpersonal listening and speaking, the ILS. Okay. The old bench was both N2, and I think there was general agreement that N2 is really not much of a benchmark because it takes very little language to be at N2. And so clearly the data show that the N3, N4 in 3rd grade is a realistic expectation because we have 78% of the students meeting that with now pretty good numbers, 1,600 students. Okay? So we can fairly safely assume that students are able to meet the N3 to N4 benchmarks in 3rd grade. Okay? Similarly, in 5th grade, we felt comfortable recommending raising it by 1 level from N3, N4 to N4I1. Keeping in mind also that when we're talking about a 5th grade benchmark, it's really a 4th grade because the students take the test early in the fall. I cannot even begin to tell you what it meant for conducting a study that the testing schedules changed. And then there were only speaking data in 2016. And full disclosure, this was the point when I said to my husband, I will need your help. Who is the co-author? Because he's a data person, a statistician. And I said, we cannot possibly analyze this data when schedules change and students take them now at a different time. How do we compensate for that in our data analysis? And we were able to do that, but that wasn't me. That was... But at least I realized that we needed to address it. So really a 5th grade benchmark means after 4 years plus a little bit, right? N3 and 4, and then there's no change in the benchmark. Maybe there's a change needed, but again, this is where the expectation and aspiration comes in order to keep students on track, really, especially with the long-term goal of AP. I think that in 7th grade, the goal has to be that students have moved into the intermediate in their performance. So even though the data don't quite get there yet, 57%, I think that that's a Chinese program decision to be made, what that means for the benchmark. Okay?
Johanna?
Yeah.
So could you just clarify the data period that you're talking about?
2017, these are the 2017 data, so last year.
17, okay.
Yeah.
Those changes are
Reflected, yeah.
No, those are your proficiency.
Yeah, these are the targets, not the
What are your
benchmark.
benchmarks?
What are the benchmarks? So I1, I2 for 7th grade. That was before. That was the same before. So we basically raised the benchmarks in the 3rd and 5th grade. It remained the same in 7th grade, and somewhat lowered in 9th grade, I2, I3.
And also in that handout, you also see two categories. One is meets and one is exceeds.
Right. So we expect, the expectation is that 80% meet, and then what's the green line? I'm sorry, I should have made that clear. I was operating on assumption. So this means, okay, then let's step a moment. Okay, so what this data means is that 78% of the students are at N3 or higher. And 45% of the students are at N4 or higher. Okay, so these are cumulative data. So by the time you get to below N1, which just means the students didn't really do the test, right? You get to the 100%. So you have a few students at I4, and then cumulatively adding up the numbers gives us the benchmark, meeting benchmark, 78% of the students, and 45% exceeding the benchmark. So this is a good example of a benchmark that's right on, right? It's right where it should be, right around 80% and 50%.
So setting a benchmark like this does not preclude any student from going way beyond.
Of course. And they do. We have 198 students at I1. But again, this is not benchmarking the top achievers. This is benchmarking the majority of the student. Where can we realistically expect the majority of students to be? Similarly here, in 5th grade, which is actually great to see the benchmarks being met at the earlier grades, because this means the cohorts coming up through the ranks are meeting them. So then perhaps what we have here in 7th grade, that's why maybe we can feel comfortable saying it's okay to stick with this for now, because the cohort that's coming, it's going to be in 5th grade, looks like they're on track at the raised benchmark. Okay. That says something odd here. Yeah, that's right. Just the numbers here, it should be, this is incorrect, I'm sorry. It should be 85% 50, ignore this. So 85% 54%. So here the benchmark seems ambitious, but again, thinking about the cohort that's coming. Okay, and then slowing down a little bit instead of going from I1 to I2 and then I3, I4. Again, taking into account that there are gains that don't necessarily show up. Students might still be at I2, but that doesn't mean they're not growing. That doesn't mean they're not improving. It just means they're not quite getting to the next level yet.
It also reflects those junior highs who only offer one course, or
Exactly.
so they're only spending 1 hour. So there's just all these factors to consider.
I just have a question. So you said in the previous slide that we were going to not change the benchmark because we know that the cohorts coming behind this initial one were performing at a higher level, right? Than perhaps these 7th graders had been when they were 5th graders. Does that make sense? So I don't understand why we're lowering it then when they're in 9th grade if we know that the cohorts coming behind it are performing at a higher level.
Because this goes back to the intermediate level taking longer. It's a big leap from I2 to I3 to I4 and 5. Or I1 and 2 to I3, I4. So, 9th grade also, this is taken into account, now we're talking about 9th grade. the exposure to, this goes back to another factor, the exposure to the language in 7th and 8th grade will be significantly less than in grades 5 and 6.
And I just was wondering if like adjusting the benchmarks at this early in the game, because we really only have, this is our lead cohort, right? 9th graders? That's our lead cohort for DLI.
Right.
So I was just curious as to why we didn't have a couple more years of data for 9th grade. I understand like adjusting like a 5th grade level because we have quite a few years of data on that.
That's exactly the discussion to have. I mean, our rationale was because our evidence is pretty clear that the students are the majority who may not actually have 2 courses in 7th and 8th grade. And so the gains between 7th and 9th grade will be significantly slower. That's the consideration.
Also, one of the factors to consider as we're getting evidence from last year and this year are the reaction of parents who don't understand any of this and that their children are not meeting our benchmarks that we did aspirationally back then. And they're pulling their kids from the program. We're losing children right and left because they didn't meet our benchmark. So the balance of all of that, politically, data-wise, aspirational, and meeting goals, is just all part of that whole decision to present this to you, and over the next few weeks, especially maybe next Friday when we meet as directors, we will have lengthy discussions and bring up all of the factors to consider, and maybe we can adjust these, but I don't want aspirational to take over all of the other factors that we must consider politically in a statewide program.
So in my mind, this doesn't change instruction. This doesn't change where students might be. What it says is that at this point, we have very little evidence or no evidence that with a reduced exposure in secondary continuation, students will be able to make a leap from the low intermediate to I4, I5, including intermediate high. So those are the considerations, but I know there are lots of other factors, and this is Chinese. The Chinese group will, I'm sure, take this all into account and then figure out how to perform this balancing act.
Go back one more.
Yeah.
So the first slide. That's the first one.
This was Chinese, now we're moving to French. So this is a couple of examples where the benchmarks were clearly pitched a little bit too low. So formally it was N4, I1. You see that 98% of the students meet N4. That's pretty good evidence to say we can raise this benchmark in 5th grade from N4, I1 to I1, I2. It's, especially this is consistent with Spanish as well. Very similar data between Spanish and French at that grade. The data here, we have very few numbers, but the I4, I5 benchmark in 9th grade looks like fairly, seems like the right one also. Although the numbers, of course, are small. Like Brandy said, with smaller numbers, it's difficult to say the early cohorts. Okay? But it looks like they're on track. Okay, so these were ILS data. Now we're looking at reading. Okay, so the 8th. I'm not giving you a comprehensive picture of everything we did, but this is just to illustrate how some of the discussions went. So here we have a small number of students, early cohort. So sometimes the early cohort can mean that you have lower results, but the early cohort, small cohort, can also mean the opposite. This is an example of the early cohort showing 8th grade. We have very high numbers. And even if the benchmark were raised by one level, the numbers would still be really high.
We could almost make it I5.
So this is just maybe a group that's heavy on that upper range, but it doesn't necessarily mean that the cohorts coming after that get slightly bigger, that will sustain that. And in fact, if we look at 6th grade results, they are more in alignment with the benchmarks. So here we had these very high numbers, but then if we look at 6th grade, the I1, I2 were actually somewhat a little bit below the benchmark with 68% and 26%. Okay? So it's, go ahead.
Which kind of comes along with the discussion we had as directors when we were first going through this data that maybe a contributing factor is the idea that 5th and 6th grade teachers don't spend a lot of time in the language, but rather in worksheets and other things that in those upper grades kind of changes the instruction from what the lower grade. So there's just all kinds of factors to consider to look at that and say, okay, what can we do in our program to help these and work toward them, making it better.
I'd like to make a comment too on this. If you look at this year too, with this cohort, that's also when we started putting in DLI programs in locations that we hadn't typically put them. So you have different profiles of school and student body demographics than what we had in those earlier cohorts too. So the fact that the kids are still performing really well and they're coming from a different background.
Fantastic.
That goes back to the between school and between district differences and different student populations, right? And even though we have a lot of good data, there's also a lot of demographic and data information that is harder to come by and to correlate with these results. Okay. So the writing is a really challenging element. Okay, and particularly because it plays such a critical role in the AP test. Okay, so when we think about the AP test, 2 of the tasks are pitched at the advanced level, including the persuasive essay. Right, the persuasive essay in the AP requires quite a bit of work. So we look at the benchmark. So we have at lower levels, meeting the benchmark at I1, I2 at this time. In 6th grade writing, 79%, same kind of performance in Portuguese and Spanish, okay? So in order for the benchmark to work, we actually said, okay, in the early grades, the students becoming literate, there isn't that much writing. Probably realistically, they're going to be at that threshold between novice and intermediate in 6th grade, okay? So then, however, when we look at what they're supposed to be doing in 9th grade, and this is a challenge, and I'm not sure we have a good recommendation in that. We just basically said, okay, if you look at the benchmark for 8th grade is I2, I3, and then for writing, and then 9th grade I4, I5.
Right.
And that seems a little crazy after 1 year. But the rationale for that is, if students are really going to take the AP test in 9th grade, they have to be in that top of the intermediate range to be able to do the persuasive essay, just like they have to be at that level for reading. Because the persuasive essay, as Brandy well knows, because she was very involved in the AP, and Fernando and I were as well, it's an advanced level task. It relies on very challenging, authentic print and audio sources. And then students have to write a persuasive essay. I think the name is going to be changed now, but it requires writing at a high level. It's an advanced level task. This has instructional implications for pre-AP and AP classes. And that's why there is a benchmark that seems high for writing as a signal, as an aspirational goal to say, if that goal of students taking the AP test in 9th grade is really going to materialize, then the writing focus has to be such that students reach something like an I4 even more in writing by the time they take the AP exam. So that's the rationale behind the AP writing. And this is, again, a recommendation. I'm not sure this is the right way to go about it. There has to be discussion about that. But it is, in my mind, the advanced level task that's required in a performance. Students should be in their benchmark at that I4, I5 level where they're able to perform an advanced level task. Okay. Jan?
I know that we put together some of our enrollment data, and so now we have a better idea of attrition, thanks to a request from Carl. So we're playing with that a lot, so I'm wondering what role that has. For example, our cohort going into 10th grade has changed a lot because we have a native speaker population. So when we looked at the kids that were actually English speakers learning Spanish that stayed in the program from kindergarten to present, that diminished quite a bit, and then we would put native speakers. So I guess one of my questions when I look at the data discrepancies between 6th grade and 7th grade and going on up is, yes, the cohort is smaller. Is that because of attrition or turnover? That's a question I would ask.
It's because some programs haven't got there yet. So they started in different years, and so not everything started at once.
Yes, the populations change dramatically when in Spanish, when heritage speakers can enter, basically, which isn't possible in the early grades.
Right.
Students can participate in the secondary continuation in 7th grade, in 8th grade, in 9th grade, right? In the bridge courses. So for Spanish, and that's why what I was alluding to with the contextual factor of language groupings and student populations. We group Spanish and French and Portuguese. Maybe that doesn't work so well once you get to the upper grades, because the Spanish population is likely to be very different in terms of their language capacity and heritage speakers than the other languages. So I don't know if it's turnover or attrition, maybe some of both, but yes, we have experienced that there will be attrition in the students. We're competing, language competes with all kinds of things. We just heard that from Aaron, right? How difficult it gets students who even go so far as to go on a pass down and then don't sign up for a test, or don't decide not to take it, or did 10th grade but then don't do a bridge course in 11th grade, and maybe they reconsider and do a bridge course in 12th grade. We don't know that yet. We don't have data on that.
We don't know. That's I guess
We
my
don't
question
know.
was.
We don't have data on that. And that's, for Apple, for benchmarking, we have great data up to 6th, 7th grade. But once we get to the upper grades, the data are much less reliable. Okay? But I just wanted to put out there that we had different considerations, different rationale for different benchmarks. And the writing was very much informed with that goal in mind that students will have to perform this advanced level task in the AP exam. So we're just kind of looking at the comparison, getting across the point how these work together. So if we look at speaking ILS, Chinese, and Russian, 9th grade, intermediate, mid. So just getting intermediate mid is equivalent to the intermediate range in the benchmark. So that there's pretty good equivalency. So these are the proficiency targets, okay? And these are the benchmarking. And so we look that the targets are representative, or at least in some way comparable. And similarly for French, German, Portuguese, and Spanish, okay? And I let Carl speak to that, but we are lobbying, Fernando and I are lobbying for 9th grade Apple testing at the beginning of the year. And especially in reading and writing. Again, that is very much with the AP test in mind, for teachers to have some sense where their students are at the beginning of the year, especially in terms of reading and writing, which is such a critical element for the AP test, and then to see where they are and where they need to be for the AP. Right now we have very little to go by in the 9th grade.
So you'll notice on the form that we've shifted 9th grade to a gray color for ILS, and colored for the remainder of pre-tests. I'm going to be pushing to have 9th grade take that test. We have 8th grade. Remember, our testing was 3579, and I thought, no, because of this data, we need a kind of formative assessment way for DLI 5 teachers to guide their students, whether you're really ready for an AP or maybe you really need to plan for 10th grade. Because we've got to start the conversation in changing the narrative that 9th grade is the goal. Because we're finding that not all students are ready at that point. We need to emphasize the path that we planned for, and that is 9th and 10th for an AP. And if we allow this Apple data to work for our ADLI 5 teachers to kind of guide our students, well, I think we'll get a better result politically and for students in their language acquisition. That's the reason why we want to shift over to those tests.
So the 9th grade AP can be like a test run, or students can, and the advice of the teacher say, you need to take another year before you take the AP test, especially in Chinese.
I don't know how to turn that off, so let's just keep going.
I know that's a really important, I mean, it's going to be clear, but I think there has to have to be some data for teachers to go by at the beginning of 9th grade.
Yeah. Through my summer.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was our having, a lot of you aren't up there, we had we've had Spanish there, with a lot of success, increasing every year, but this year, all of our languages, we had a PR nightmare in Granite. Our superintendent spent one entire day with parents coming in, upset, feeling they'd been misled, their kids weren't ready, their kids had failed, the AP, and our communications, it's still ongoing for us. So I think Jill's going to talk about our discussions around how we're trying to remedy that in Granite moving forward. But I would so applaud having 9th grade, because that's one of the things that Sharon and I have kind of talked about. How do we help the parents make an informed decision? And in Granite, we encouraged every student to take the AP, and I don't think there's anything wrong with that. But I think we have to help the kids understand what's the realistic expectation for passing. It's great that you get 2 opportunities, but they didn't see it that way because we hadn't set it up that way.
Correct. Exactly.
Yeah, framing is really important. Okay, so coming back to the kind of the contextual factors. To me, the really most important ones are what kind of data evidence do we have? And again, we have performance data, and they shift, like Brandy was pointing out. Sometimes the early data can mean one thing, but they can also mean something different. How we group languages, what kind of student populations, and then really that we at the moment are still kind of operating in the dark with a secondary DLI continuation, and especially the bridge program. So anything that can happen with collecting more data on the students, the formative and summative assessments working in tandem, and understanding that students are completing 2 important summative assessments, the Apple and then ultimately the AP, which is also a performance test. It's not a proficiency test. And that ultimately when students in 10th grade, if they pass the AP but actually get something higher than a 3, is going to be better for them ultimately than just barely passing with a 3. When and why should they take the AP test? 9th grade, maybe it makes more sense for some of them, or maybe for many of them, to take it in 10th grade, which is still great, especially if they get a higher score. So I think this is where the balancing act comes into play. The rhetoric has been very much around getting students ready for AP in 9th grade, but we've always known that's a big, ambitious goal, right? And there were always voices saying, let's just see. So 9th or 10th grade, that's great.
Any questions for?
Any questions, comments?
Will we be able to have access to the presentation?
Sure. I have a couple of other additional slides sort of talking about where we're going and other data, but yeah. There's one data point that maybe I could share that I just looked at again. Oops. Early data point, but I think it's instructive in the context of what we just talked about.
These are what we decide on for the Apple.
Yes.
So we'll know, right now I'm assuming these are a draft or an application, and you'll let us know
Right.
to make them.
Don't make them public yet. There still needs to have discussion amongst our DLI team and come to an agreement. And then we will ship out to you benchmarks. And I'll be asking our assessment department to roll out 9th grade as well in those other 2 sections, and we'll get that paid for this year as well somehow. So,
Do we have a testing window yet?
yeah, the testing window is November 1st through December 15th. The assessment directors just had a meeting yesterday afternoon, and they'll also be trained this afternoon as well. So they know the window, and they know kind of what needs to happen. So our assessment directors here have been in contact and are really kind of sold and behind dual language immersion. I know that Aaron Nielsen came from Box Elder and had dual immersion, is very sold on it. Jared Wright, who is the director of assessment, has a child in Chinese immersion and very invested as well. So we're getting great help from our assessment department. Our data department also is giving great results and reports for us. So things we're looking up is, I don't want you to leave this discussion kind of down, because I think it's great to be able to look at the data and revise and have discussions over it. So go ahead and finish your thing. And
Yeah, it's just, I mean, a lot of the benchmarks are right on. They really seem like they're working exactly how intended, and it's great considering how, how difficult it is to go through all these different factors. We have one small data point of a very early cohort of students that took the OPIC, the OPIC. These were 102 students that were tested. I think you have maybe have seen this before, the first cohort of Spanish Bridge students. And even though half of them actually did meet or exceed the proficiency target, we also have to acknowledge that 46% of the students were at intermediate mid, beginning of 10th grade, in Spanish. Again, driving home the point of what they do in their performance might be intermediate high or even advanced, but when they then take a proficiency assessment, intermediate mid can be might be equivalent to an I4 on the Apple, right? The top range of intermediate mid, but not intermediate high and not into advanced. Yeah.
Which schools did the OPIC?
That would a question for Jill. The first cohort of schools in the Bridge program, Jill?
All of them, or?
The first cohort of Bridge students that did the OPIC, which schools? There was in Taylorsville.
2 in Davis, 2 in Granite, and four schools.
2 in Davis, 2 in Granite.
Oh,
We did the OPIC and then we did the writing this year.
this is
This is 16, 17. This is the data. We don't have this year's data yet. This was the
5.
So I think you know how to get in touch with me. You can contact Fernando and me, and I'm sure we'll keep talking. I really appreciate the opportunity to sort of think through all that. This is really intellectually stimulating and such a great problem to have to figure out, how to set these targets and benchmarks. It's a very exciting project. And we're conducting another study. We're also working on our grant and we'll be working with lots more data, and we'll make those available. That's the whole goal, is to do the research and then make it available to all of you, and then hear your feedback and the questions you're asking to inform our research. So thank you very much for the opportunity.
I have a quick question. Do you have data on our dual immersion students and the SAGE test to compare them with their non-dual immersion peers? Are we looking at that as well?
We conducted one study that's published on 3rd and 4th graders math achievement, and that's from 2016. So this were fairly early data, 14, 15. I can get that reference to you. And then as part of the grant we currently have, that's exactly what we're looking at. So we have some preliminary data, and we'll be writing up and presenting an ACTFL actually on that, looking at analysis of exactly that connection between the academic achievement and the DLI.
So if I have a couple of schools concerned, can I just reach out to you and you could give me some preliminary data to share with them? Absolutely. Great, thank you.
yes,
Can I clarify that these benchmarks and targets we are previewing these, and then your team will get together and discuss. So as far as when these are actually going to be
I will resend them all to you and say it's a go.
Okay.
For the actual ones we all settle on.
And so you're looking to have that prior to the Apple window? And one consideration then might be that often, although we have a lot of knowledge about the difference between performance and proficiency, and I'm working hard to educate our teachers on what the difference is and what that means, and often they say to me, the curriculum is well above what their proficiency target is, that, and I have to explain then once again the difference between the performance and so just knowing that our teachers are really need a lot of help in how to teach above targets and benchmarks. So if we lower those, there is something to consider on how it impacts instruction.
You can't get to advanced if you only teach intermediate.
That's exactly how we're trying to coach our teachers.
Students at the intermediate level need to do advanced level tasks.
Yes.
Coming back to the Utah Seal by Literacy, if you notice down in the English part on Sage, that description, the 11th grade up to the spring of 2018 can be used. If they were a junior last spring, then they can use that data for the Seal by Literacy. But starting this year, they will be, the 11th grade assessment is replaced by ACT, that the Board of Education has put forth. In lower grades, it's RISE, and then in 9th and 10th is going to be Aspect or something like that. So it's different pieces. So as you look at the Seal by Literacy, just know that the SAGE English assessment can be used if they were a junior last year. Does that help sort that out?
Okay, Carl, can I just make a clarification too? Just as a clarification, the project that we're working on with Fernando to train community members is really just a Band-Aid. We want to make sure that we're really clear on that. We're working with, trying to communicate with other agencies, universities and stuff around the country to find out other tests that they're using for some of these other languages. But what Fernando's doing is just kind of holding us off till we're able to do that. So they're not confirmed tests that have been accepted nationally, norms, all that kind of stuff. So just know that piece. That's important. I think Fernando would like me to make sure that you're clear on that.
Awesome. So Utah Foreign Language Association, oh yes, Mary Beth.
Okay, proficiency, I just wanted to know, once it's decided, will new proficiency guides and reports be created? Because we've already given that out to parents this year, based on what we've been doing. And so, that with our first SEPs and all, and so now we're changing, we would need new proficiency levels and guides and maybe a standard explanation that would help with parents to why we're doing what we're doing.
Sounds great. Other questions at this point? So item
Carol,
six.
one more, quick.
Yeah.
Related to that, if we have SEPs coming up, do you want us to hold off sending old targets out then?
That's up to you.
When do you anticipate having a decision?
It's not going to be like in the next week, but it'll be in the next 2 or 3 weeks.
Okay.
I'd say hold on.
I would hold off because these are important that we provide good information, and it might even take us a little time to develop those things that Mary Beth is talking about. So
Teachers have already planned.
I'm sorry.
Ours are on Monday.
That's fine.
Ours are already done.
As we go through that,
Everything's ready.
we'll be able to process that. So just wanted to bring your attention to the Fall 2-Day Workshop on project-based learning that U of LA is giving on November 2nd and 3rd in Texas State. The link is there if you want to go to that. Also, the 104th annual, I just gave you a flyer, an annual conference, so that you can send your world language teachers to that if you possibly can. That would be really important to do so. Also this year, we're going to be providing a one-day workshop for all world language teachers as well. Greg Duncan will be providing that in April. So that'll be a nice, we'll be doing one in St. George, and then one in the central part, and then one north. So teachers can have a regional place to go. And it's all on proficiency.
Do you have dates for sure or not yet?
No, not yet. All right. Jill, would you give us an update on Southwest Cult and the bridge? You want to connect into there?
Oh, I
Oh,
didn't know
you're-
I was gonna be able to do a PowerPoint, so I have notes.
Okay, great.
I would have
Perfect.
done, I would have done sort of bulleted agenda for everybody. So my notes are just really quick for Southwest Colt. So I'm serving for Utah as your representative, and it's been an interesting experience. I encourage you to try it once. It's really been great. It's been good. And so I guess I thought I would tell you about not just the deadlines, but I do value Southwest Colt for bringing a regional conference to our state once every many years. That is one of the things that Southwest Colt does do for the 11 states. They rotate through. This year it's in Texas. Next year is in Nevada. So for southern Utah, it would be very close, and that might be even closer than coming to Salt Lake. I don't know. And so we have talked a lot as Southwest Colt about how do we support across state lines. So, and if you, I don't know if any of you are planning to go. Anyone going to go this coming March 28th through the 30th? Okay, no worries. So what I'll do is my goal is just to keep everyone updated as to what the discussions are. Another big thing that Southwest Colt does for us in Utah is Teacher of the Year. So our Teacher of the Year from our state goes on to the regional, which then if they win at regional, they could become the actual representative for the Southwest states. So a couple years ago, that was Fernando Rubio. So he was our representative, and so he was up there with the other regional, nominees. It's really a big deal. And so we have this year, our Teacher of the Year is Diego Batista, who is Weber State University's amazing professor of Spanish, and also he launched the Bridge program the first year and partnered in Uniting. Yeah, he's delightful. So it'll be great to have him go to Southwest Colt. And we're also talking with UFLA, we discussed how we could mentor our Teacher of the Years so that they know how to, it's kind of like you have to sell yourself. It's not really just being a teacher, it's coaching them on how to sell themselves on a national stage and be an advocate for languages. So it's really a neat opportunity. I think Diego will be amazing. We like to nominate, UFLA likes to nominate, elementary, a secondary, a higher ed person. So be thinking, I wonder if you would be willing to send Carl or me any ideas you have for nominations. I think we need someone from elementary, really. I would love that. We haven't had an elementary person as the Utah Teacher of the Year. So I just wanted to put that out to you all. Instead of the UFLA board sitting around deciding, well, who are the fabulous teachers we know, I wanted to put this out to you all. You know your teachers. So please send us ideas, and we would love to, Carl or I assume you would love to help me, right?
Absolutely.
To usher through a teacher that you feel is strong, because I think that you know them best. So, okay, so the conference this year is in Texas. I do want to tell you, next year, I'm wrong, it's not in Nevada. Next year, it's in California at the Disneyland Resort. So maybe you'll want to go. And then it's in Nevada. I forgot. Okay. And then again, there are scholarships, and you all have. I was the scholarship chair last year, and I passed that on to someone else. But I do want to tell you, I learned a lot about this process in that you sent me your names of fabulous teachers, and last year 2 out of the 3 scholarships went to Utah teachers. Year before that, 1 out of the 3 went to Utah teachers. These are for Spanish, and the reason why Southwest Colt sponsors these Spanish scholarships is because the other languages do have scholarships. You need to go to the American Teachers of French and the American Teachers of German. Their association, the Goethe Institute, has scholarships for German. So there are other scholarships, it's just there are a lot more, and so they do this regional scholarship through Southwest Colt. So I don't want to diminish, or I want to make sure everyone knows that the other languages do have scholarships that you could also think of. Who are your fabulous German, French? I don't know a Chinese one, honestly. I haven't seen, it doesn't really be there. Okay, so you could sponsor a teacher for that too. Usually you need to write a letter of recommendation. Okay. All right, so for bridge updates, this would have been good to bullet on the PowerPoint. I decided that I want to do two things that are really procedural really quick, just to mention. Number one, and then one larger topic to talk to you all about and to kind of get your input. Procedural things. There are 2 new courses being developed. Anne is working with our French curriculum committee, which is, I want to remind you, it's representatives from all of the universities so that everyone agrees on the course. They agree that the credit will transfer between universities once the student earns the credit. And then the Chinese course the new Chinese course is being developed as well. All 3 Spanish courses have been developed, so there are no more new Spanish courses. It'll just be getting more depth of resources and curriculum. And then next year we'll begin Portuguese. So you will see those. The course numbers come from Carl, right? Because that's USBE numbers. That's not university numbers. The university numbers are already set. That's a different system. Those are submitted through departments to be approved in November. The process starts at our universities. And then by when will the course numbers be available? Because everybody will need those, right?
Right. So it takes a few months because we work with USHE and we work with concurrent enrollment and a few other things. So they won't be ready for at least till.
Yeah. Oh, that's earlier than usual. Okay, great. And then the new courses are submitted to USHE by the end of November. So, and that's what you wait for. Yeah. Okay, the other procedural thing is that site meetings are continuing. If you are at a district, there are a bunch of you with sites that will launch in 2 years and sites that will launch 1 year from now. In all of those, we want to have site meetings with you. There are so many of you that I would request your help to do a district meeting. So I'm trying to coordinate with USBE as much as we can. Before we were doing it separately, but I think it makes sense for us to come together. So we'll be contacting you if you have a site that will be beginning in either 2 years from now or 1 year from now. And then we, of course, continue with everyone who's doing it. Okay, so here's the big picture issue, and this links into what we were just talking about. It links into a lot of the challenges that I've watched play out this year in enrollment and messaging of the program, fulfilling the expectations of parents. All those things are kind of political. They're communicative. I think that what I come back to is that if our goal is biliteracy and bilingual education, and if our goal is a K-16 pipeline, then our team should be attending to what does it mean to shift from K-12 to higher ed? What does it mean to be ready post-AP for these university courses? So my goal is to have stronger connections with our counselors and with the world of counseling. I feel that if we're going to have students that do 2 languages in education plus are beautifully prepared in all of their other academic areas, we have to be good partners and good messengers with our counselors, with our principals, to say that this is a whole school thing. We can't. It's actually a good thing for us. It's more complicated, but it means that we're part of who the child is in their high school career. It's about the whole thing. It's not just the language. So the child needs our support through lots of resources, and I wanted to share some of the things that are happening through counseling, probably at your schools, but if you can overlap and dovetail with what's happening in your districts, we will have a better message for our bilingual aspirations, our biliteracy. So number 1 is the Step Up to Higher Education program. So how many of you are work at the school and you know about Step Up? Okay, that's your homework. And I think what I'll do is I'm going to how about if I send a few little links, if you would be willing to give yourself, when you have time to read, learn about the Step Up program. They did a pilot last year with a few schools that had such good success with college enrollment and showing up on campus. Actually getting there is actually a challenge. Just because you enroll and are accepted to a university doesn't mean that the child will show up. And then the statistics on dropping out after your freshman year is very shocking. And so how do we prepare kids? When do we get them in? How do we keep them in? All the supports they need once they're on campus. It's a huge, huge deal. So we have the whole state of our counselors they're ready. They want to do this. So Step Up is a program that meshes with USHE's, the Utah System of Higher Education, working in our high schools. Some things that are really attractive to me is that they have youth ambassadors who have previous high school students who are now going to college. Some of them speak languages. And so we're looking at bringing some of those students who I just asked at the presentation. Any of them speak other languages? We have, you have any Chinese, you have any French, any Spanish? So we're trying to get those students in and talking about what it means to be a college student. The research on college success is that if they don't have the behaviors to be self-advocates, if they don't have the behaviors to know how to be independent learners, they're not going to survive. And so I feel that we have an opportunity to just interweave a lot of these things into our program, little by little, with teachers who are ready. We will begin piloting that with 2 teachers this year with Spanish who are interested and have the students that they want to not only teach this bridge course, but they want to teach them about what it means to have the behaviors, the independence, the non-academic types of indicators that are correlated to succeeding in college. So we can do this, but I think we can do it with the help of our counselors too. College Application Week is a USHE-sponsored event in October. Any of you know about? It's called UCAW, Utah College Application Week. Great. So if you have, I know that a lot of our high schools do school-wide college application. This is another thing. If we can get our bridge kids in, if you can get your 9th graders aware of this, then you will have a stronger base for moving on to thinking of themselves as college material and getting ready for that. And then finally, USHE just announced that they are discussing putting a full-time college access liaison in every high school. So having a full-time person, and this just came out in a newsletter from Higher Ed. So I'll just keep you updated and see if that's happening. Right now there is one who's full-time in West High School, full-time in Taylorsville. So there are some sites that were piloting that concept, and the returns on it were like 30% more kids applied and got into college with this liaison there. Like, it just takes so much help when you don't have a parent who has gone to college to walk you through the system. That leads to enrollment. So the big thing I want to mention to you, the challenge this year has been learning how to support students to enroll who have no background knowledge on what it means to enroll for college. I bet we enrolled, I bet 50 at Taylorsville who perhaps who have never had any supports before to enroll for college, and they're enrolled. And it took way past our deadline. We just kind of eliminated our deadline at the U and just said, let's just get every student in this year. It's our first year with the U partnering with so many students. So we're trying to figure out the system, but it's really difficult. Undocumented students in Utah should be supported to take CE and to go to college. And they have actually an act that protects them. Senate Bill 253 is something that would be, I'll send you a link for this as well. It's good for, I didn't know about it. I knew that we had supports. I didn't know exactly what they were. So I worked with the USHE office, and there's an attorney over immigration at USHE that helped with the wording of this document. So this is something that should be public and available. The tone of this document is the goal is to get every student registered. It's not saying if you're undocumented, it's not saying that in the title, but how do you get every student registered and what are the potential barriers of students? So we're trying to take away those barriers. One of them is that the application system through USHE, students couldn't, there are parents who do not have an email. There are parents that do not have a computer, and that was an assumption made by USHE. If you're going to register through the system of higher education, you had to do this platform,
but it just didn't work. And so as the deadlines approached, we spoke with Yushi, and Taylorsville's amazing CE coordinator said, we've just got to get a paper copy. This isn't going to work. So now we have shifted to having a paper copy as a backup for any student. You can't get registered. I think that we need to talk about doing that through Dixie and all of the options for the universities. Like this just can't be a barrier. We have to figure out how to make it work. So if students complete 3 years of high school and they graduate with a diploma, and if they sign a letter of intent to gain citizenship, they can receive in-state tuition and be undocumented. That's the bill. So we want students to know that there is support for them to have in-state tuition. Again, how can we layer this in? Because the counselors can't talk to every kid, but we have a great audience. We have our Bridge kids right there. Let them all know that this is something that's there for them.
Jill, question.
Yep.
Do you know if financial aid is available to undocumented workers?
Yes. So there's a link on this sheet also for, it links to each of our 6 public institutions' scholarship platforms, and they can apply for this. Yes. And Carolyn Schubach was just telling me, Carolyn, that at the U, on the board she sits on, that they don't know who's undocumented and who's not, but that there's clearly a need being met, right? You would say that it appears that based on need, there's a lot of students who are being helped with scholarships.
They don't have, I mean, in particular, the University of Utah Alumni Association gives $800,000 worth of scholarships every year, and the application doesn't ask them at all. It doesn't matter. And really, when I see and go to the event for the kids to receive it, I'd say most of them are undocumented. So just there are a number of opportunities for kids to get scholarships that don't even ask.
I'll send you the link, but the number of the bill was 253, Senate bill. And
Wait a minute, Senate Bill what?
253.
What year?
I will have to look back, but I'll send you the link. I found it. I had to search it because I wasn't told the year. But it's referred to, actually Senator Stevenson, Howard Stevenson was one of the sponsors, interestingly. Yes. And he's very proud of it. Yeah, it went through. And he was saying that they referred to it as the Dream Act for Utah. It's sort of the dreamers specifically for our Utah system of higher education. Okay, so some ideas on remessaging and course articulation. This is what I'm trying to get, as I get around to talk to all of you in your districts, I want to hear how those of you who did enroll students this year, how it's gone. I feel that there may be some room for rethinking how we enroll Bridge students, because we want to message that you just keep going, right? You didn't fail because you didn't pass AP. You just go on to the next step. And so one option that Sherry Sorensen shared with me in Granite, they're thinking about, do we just enroll all of those DLI 5 students into AP? Just automatically. You enroll them in AP, but you would have to do that AP enrollment plus Bridge enrollment. Do you intend, do you wish? You can't just do AP enrollment, or I have no numbers to provide the department who hires your instructor. So you won't have an instructor if we don't know how many sections. And so the whole enrollment issue kind of hinges on the fact what Johanna was mentioning. We don't have enough data to know how to predict attrition and retention and all of the other factors, heritage speakers, AP pipelines. So we just have such inadequate data. And I am hoping that at some point, maybe USBE can help us to have AP data so we know at each site a history of, a ballpark of the pass rate. And I don't know if all of you, I don't know, but we need that.
So you're saying in 10th grade, all the 10th graders, you register them for both?
Yeah,
so that you
need to ask, do you want to register for Bridge if you pass AP? And then enroll them in both.
In case they don't pass, they're in the AP class, but they're also
ready for either one.
Here's the problem we had in Granite, I'll speak to this. Because we had enrolled them in Bridge, thinking that was a good idea, which I believe it is, But the kids that didn't pass the AP that were high achieving students felt like they had been demoted.
Yeah.
We felt like it's better to accelerate a child than it is to say, oh, sorry, you didn't pass the AP, so you're registered for the bridge, but now we're going to move you back to AP. And so if we begin to say we're going to enroll everybody because that's the pathway, the only thing that saved us in, which you went out to lunch with me the day the AP scores came out, and her grade watched me wallow in our pity, but that way, the thing that saved us is that document the state put out that it said AP option. So every parent that we met with, we said, you know, it was an option, and we're glad your child took it because it's better preparing them. But we just came up with, it's just better to enroll them in AP and accelerate. They passed it. We're going to accelerate you into rather than we're going to move you back. And that's going to help them, you know, hopefully we'll work with the principals in scheduling and we'll have them fill out a form. As I talked with Jill, she can kind of just tell you that, but it's what we felt like in Granite we've got to do to alleviate that. Because then these kids that should be, are high achieving students and are devastated they didn't pass and they're being demoted and it's embarrassing and.
So our message is that the path goes DLI 5 and then AP and then bridge. If they pass it, then they're
We'll
skipping.
accelerate you into the bridge class.
Just
Rather than
accelerate.
reverse.
So because I know you need to know like in January or December what our numbers are for the following year for bridge, and it's, so how are we going?
So each year, hopefully we can get your feedback on how it went and how we can do better. But what I'm going to talk about with all the districts is based on what, you know, how this year went. And so I feel like we need to have the letter of intent to enroll in bridge from a student saying yes, I would like to, which is what we've done in the past. So it'd be AP or bridge, depending on your pathway. And so I think we can change the wording of that letter of intent. Like, yes, I'm continuing the program. So continuation of the program with intent to, whichever course is the one for me. And so we can use that for students, we can get their name. And then I do need, I think, my idea that I was talking with Sherry just yesterday, was that then the teacher who is the AP, the teacher that would administer the AP exam or who's prepping the kids for AP, could just go through the students in the springtime and help us with enrollment adjustments. So to see if, well, based on the number of students that want to enroll, I have to look at pass rate and make a guess. And the first year we worked on every kid in the pipeline, we're gonna be ready for you. But then the implication is that the department has twice as many sections that they've budgeted for, and they've now slashed a position of a faculty member, and that is, we can't function like that as a program. Higher ed that's a message of lack of confidence, that you can't fill the sections that you predicted. So it's really not a good prediction model that every child in the pipeline will go from 5 honors to bridge, clearly.
And this is, excuse me, the factor of why we want to offer the ninth graders that, to be able to help those world language teachers kind of help the student really understand if they're going to pass the AP or not.
So we really do need input from the teacher that's prepping him for the test, whoever that is, 5 honors or AP teacher. So, it's never saying, well, this student I don't think will make it, but oh, they did. We're not going to not let them in. It's just we have to get closer on our enrollment projections because we lack data. We lack the AP data right now. How many students are sitting in your class? How many took the test? How many got a 3? How many got a 4? How many got a 5? That would be my wish list from all of you, and I could do a better prediction. Can I do that? Just doing that. Please? Yes. So this is not for publishing results of pass rates. This is because I have to, in 2 sessions for the legislature, 2 years from now, our team needs to be ready to go back and say, we need this much more money. Or we don't have enough sections for the increase in enrollment for our DLI pipeline. So if I don't figure this out now, we don't have, in 2 years, we're not gonna have a leg, we're gonna have one leg to stand on instead of two, like as we try and argue our case with the legislature. So we really need to know this. Can we get this data?
Yeah, could we talk about the best way to make that happen? So
Yeah,
we have
that's my
an
question
agreement
I wanted to
here.
open up to all of you so that we can support your students when they're ready. I have to know, like right now, honestly, when I submitted, we're going to be presenting to department chairs and deans on October 25th to problem solve the budget. How do we stretch the limited funding we have for our program for all the sections of French, Chinese, and Spanish that we need? And I don't really have good data. So I'm saying, well, about 30 the first year, about 60 the second year, we hope for 90 the third year. And so we're not going to even go beyond that because we have such poor data that I can't even imagine what, I mean, it's not founded to predict past that. So how might we set up a system?
Yeah, I don't know, I'm not real familiar with who the data goes to. It seems from our efforts in Chinese to try to collect the AP data from this past year, I've received multiple formats, including word of mouth numbers, I've heard that, in one district, the assessment director had the information, another they don't. So I don't really know where the information is sent to.
The AP coordinator has it.
Comes
At the
directly to
school.
the teacher.
Right?
Oh, I have it.
At the
District.
district.
At the district
If they
level.
have a person.
You have it,
You
the
have
individual
it.
teacher has it.
You have to be assigned in addition
And
to the
AP only
teacher.
allows you to assign so many people, so there's somebody in the school, whoever the district designates.
So we learned it the hard way, so now they're gonna have to add me, because last year I was hunting down results.
Really?
Yeah,
Okay.
so.
But there's some things you have to be mindful of in releasing AP data, and that might be where people are things, because if you release by, and we have the parents wanting it, we won't release in Granite by an individual school to an entity, because that makes it identifiable, because there's one AP Chinese teacher, and there's one AP French. So then it becomes identifiable, just in the same way that when you look at SAGE in a school, you see, third grade, and it doesn't say this teacher, this teacher, this teacher. Because you release by individual school, it's identifiable. And then they can begin to identify by a process of elimination who are the kids that passed, who are the kids that didn't pass. So in Granite, we will only release as a collective whole for Chinese, AP, and French. So I think, although I understand and I try to give you the data, but we can't, and our parents want it. Because the parents begin collecting their own data.
Yes, they
That's very true. Well, just so you know, parents have contacted me about data from your district
Well, they
that they're
have to
sure they
contact-
have that's right.
Yeah, they have to contact.
So I guess the question would be then, how do we find out who the designated data person is for the given districts with AP? And what data is available? I mean, I appreciated what you had shared with me about instructional implications. I mean, that's what I would like to know in terms of providing training for those teachers going forward.
I think I submitted to Georgia, to you, and I don't know, Ophelia, I think I sent our
I didn't even
instructional
know that
planning,
existed.
instructional planning report,
Right,
so you can get an
instructional
idea of
planning, right.
where
So I
they
mean,
were.
that's something that would really assist us in servicing, right?
Carl, I'm wondering if that could be something that you could initiate, is that just invite the districts to share that information with you and let them know that that's information that we'll compile for the state level by language. So that, because we're being asked for that data, and hunting that data is just very time consuming, and sometimes it's threatening when we call and we're calling a district and say, can you give me your AP scores? And so I'm wondering if we can coordinate that.
I'll see if I can do that.
But can I say a comment about that? That I think you have to frame it with the parents. They will call and they'll say, I want the AP pass rate 4, because they kind of want to in a lot of the parents I've done, they want to start pointing fingers at the teacher, they want to start pointing fingers at the kids that shouldn't have been in the class. And so I try to frame the conversation. The pass rate really doesn't matter. What matters is looking at your own child and were they prepared to take the test. What it's about your own child. It's not about if only 7 kids and 23 passed, which is the reality in one of our APs, it doesn't matter. It just matters how your own individual child did in that class and were they prepared. And that's why that 9th grade data would be so helpful, because teachers could strategically use that with parents to say, let's take a look. And although it's like I said, I think it's very beneficial for a child to take the AP test in 9th grade. For some of like our Kearns High School parents, it was a financial burden for them. Even though they got the reduced fee waiver for it, still it's a lot of money. And so if we can share whether your child, given these factors, here's where we think they should be to be adequately prepared. Do you want to invest the money until hopefully someday our legislature funds AP testing for students, which I would love, but until that happens, making that, and that's where I had a mom in tears because they had really had to sacrifice as a family for their child who was a straight A student, who was a 4 in this age, to take that AP test that she didn't pass. So.
Can I just a different perspective, and I'm new to this, but in working with parents who have started their children in first grade in a Chinese immersion program in Provo District, for instance, I'm acquainted with a lot of these parents whose children have taken the AP test recently. And from their perspective, I think that they have younger children. They want to support this program. But I know there's security and student data, and for privacy is huge. That's number one. But I feel like from a parent perspective, don't they kind of have a right to know as a stakeholder how overall the program is succeeding with what they hoped in a way that is not totally like throwing a teacher under the bus, because we don't want to do that, but that's open and transparent, because these are the parents, if they feel good and they feel like they're getting answers, they'll continue to put kids in this program and word of mouth, and that's our future to keeping this program going. That's just...
Well, we will release as a whole,
right?
But you can't.
But a pass rate. I mean, the pass rate.
The pass rate as a whole, we will release. So Chinese AP this, French AP this, but we will not release it by school. Right.
Well,
And you can't by law because
they
it
don't
depends
do
on
it with all
Right.
It should be statewide.
Yeah.
And along with that, if I could just throw in, tag on to what Ruth was saying there, I think just as we've been trying to do with proficiency as a whole and educating parents and ourselves about what that really means, the same thing needs to happen with AP, because parents have a really often skewed view, like, what's the pass rate? Well, let's see, this is the first year we've ever done the test. So what use is the pass rate at this point, really? If we're trying to look at a program, right now that's the first cohort, the first time that's ever been done, just like with any first AP class. It's not necessarily going to be reflective of what's going to be happening with the program,
No,
right?
right.
So I'm
But
not really sure what that serves, except to maybe comfort themselves if their child.
I think from these parents, it's more or less like, okay, like my child passed, but a child whose good friends didn't, like, where could they have been better prepared? That type of thing. It's not, the conversations I have had are not critical to a teacher whatsoever. It's more or less when they were sold on immersion at the very beginning. I worked in a first grade class with that very first grade group that's now 9th graders. Parents were given it's managing expectations, I think. And I think it's like the conversation we had earlier. I think as long as we do that and say, hey, if they don't pass in 9th grade the AP, that's okay. Like this isn't the end of the road for all of these kids. I think it's just managing the conversation and the expectations going further.
So that's why messaging around this whole thing cannot end in 9th grade, because that's what used to be the thing. Talking to kindergarten parents, we're giving them the pathway. say, yeah, in ninth grade, they'll pass the AP, they'll go on to other things. So we've got to help manage that narrative, all of the different aspects. Can you see how it all connects?
It does.
From the performance benchmarks, efficiency targets, to AP scores, to Apple scores, from first grade clear through bridge and college. We're now sitting at kind of a really important crossroads in our program to help to be able to make good decisions that'll help our narrative be more realistic to parents and their expectations, because the parents are the ones who decided to put the child in. The parents are the ones who keep their child in and make sacrifices. We need to make sure that we are messaging the correct information that will help them keep trying and keep working to be in our program and not feel like they've been let down if their child wasn't quite ready to take the AP. Johanna and then Vanessa.
I think the parents are also going to be really important partners in pushing for the 2 courses in the 7th and 8th grade, because once the exposure to the language goes down to something like 20% of the school day, which it will with 1 course rather than 35 or 40, the chances for being ready for AP in 9th grade dramatically decrease. So the parents, you can also turn this around and saying, look, if we're going to pursue this goal of 9th or 10th grade AP, one of the key elements is there isn't this disruption or reduction at the middle school level. So help us, get the schools to actually offer 2 courses. I know 1 is obligatory, but 1 is optional, right? And unfortunately, schools are opting for just 1 course. So the parents have to be partners in saying, this program is built on the premise that we have a certain amount of exposure to the language.
I wonder if there is data about how many students actually pass any AP tests. Because from my understanding as a parent, I remember my kids taking this APs, and the percentage of students who actually pass, it's not a big number. And of course, we have a parent that's putting the kids through this exam, helping, supporting, and needs to understand the percentage also from other classes that they can take. So it's a comparison, says that, oh, you're failing DLI. No, this is a hard test, but you don't need to give up because you didn't pass the AP. Actually, there is an option. So I think there is a mentality for parents who have children taking AP in all subjects that maybe we can present an evidence on that side next week.
And that's a good point, because as I was telling Jill yesterday, AP themselves says, sorry if we've taken your meeting clear off target. AP themselves says that we should only expect about a 65% pass rate if you haven't screened kids out and you have a well-qualified, a good teacher. You're only going to expect 65%. And as I was sharing with Jill, the reality is I've looked at now 3 years of data of our kids that have passed the AP. With the exception of native Spanish speakers, if they're not achieving a 3 on their SAGE test scores, they're not passing the AP. SAGE, ELA, they're not passing the AP. That does not hold true with our native Spanish speakers, but it holds true without almost exception for every other student. So it might be nice as if we begin looking at 2 pathways, because as I looked at each student individually when we sent out, which I go through and look at the student profile of almost every one of our students. What is their course taking? What have they done? I have students that are in Bridge and taking Italian, or in Bridge and taking Spanish Bridge but taking French. So it might be nice if we laid out 2 pathways with AP in 10th grade and the bridge option, but maybe if you never pass AP, so they continue in some sort of world language. Maybe that's when they start another language. maybe we should look at additional high school courses. I don't know, just a thought, because there are those students that will not pass the AP and they will be done with language if we don't lay out some other options. And we used to have that back in a lot of years ago, before the bridge, that was the thing, start another language or.
I remember all those conversations.
So.
Okay.
Okay, so yeah, my last thing to pass on is that this is like on a counseling level that I think all of you should know. I sent out to all of your CE coordinators, but I knew I'd be talking to you, so I will send this out to you. I wanted to talk to you first. That I am working with each of our 6 public universities plus BYU. It will be sending out a minor major pathway document so that your counselors, your program can know how are they expecting to place students with their transcript from high school showing bridge courses. So number 1, what happens if they complete all 3 courses? If they enter with 9, that would be a maximum number, and then we have this positioning of about 2 to 3 additional courses needed to get to acquire a minor. But we have students who have taken 1, and we have students who have taken 2 bridge courses, and that's a different student linguistically, and so departments will need to decide how they will place students for that. So those are trickling in. I think Weber's done. I don't think anyone else is quite done. I don't know, Ann, do you have any news?
No, the department will have the first faculty meeting the 4th of October, and so that will be an issue we will address.
Great, okay, good. So maybe you could report on that as that comes up too. But the goal is to have all of those by the time students need to get their transcripts. And the very last thing is I had good questions about how does a student get their transcript with Bridge, especially through the U of U, because the U of U doesn't have a CE department. They don't claim to do CE, but they do Bridge and they do AIMS, right? So that's a good question. So at any university, it's the same as at the U, same thing where the student needs to know their ID number. So they may not have ever used that in a Bridge class, or they may have used it. They may need it to log in to Canvas, or they may not use it. It just depends on the instructor. So just like your counselor will say, well, if you're going to get it, you have to know your ID number. So that's something that I'd like our instructors to be ready to give students who need to get their transcript, and it should be not a big deal. But just let me know if you have any other good questions coming up. And I just thanks all for your feedback, and we'll try and improve the process as we go.
Thanks, Jill. Appreciate it. All right. Hope to see a lot of you at ACTFL coming up, and successful in ASFL. If you participate, that would be great. Yes.
With the dual immersion, or the immersion SIG for ACTFL, I've been serving as the vice chair for 2 years, and Rita's been serving as the secretary, and those positions are open, and we would love to see someone from Utah be willing to step up and serve, but we've got to get that in by this weekend. So if any of you would be willing. Well, the word has gone out.
Want to explain what you
It's the actual SIG, there's the different
Special interest groups.
Right, special interest groups. And immersion is one of them, and I've been serving as the vice chair, I think that's the name, and Rita's been serving as a secretary. You do something at the conference, we're presenting at the conference this time, but then it's mostly just online things. I've been responsible for the newsletter, which I do quarterly, and minimal so it isn't a huge time commitment, but it does keep you in the loop of what's going on with ACTFL, and it's nice to have some representation from the state of Utah. So if anybody would be considering, or you want to nominate someone, let me know, and we will try and. Yeah. No, I mean, it's been a good experience. You did it, right, Carrie?
Yeah, I'm the secretary.
Right. So, anyway.
Yeah, if you want to volunteer, go. We usually have 2 DLI Advisory Council meetings. For this year only, we are replacing the fall Dual Language Immersion Council, Advisory Council with what we call regional meetings. Myself, Carolyn, Lois, and Shauna are going out to school districts and meeting with principals and just giving a general overview of the program, and then taking a lot of feedback. And we've done that in 3 different school districts at this point, and have had really good meetings. I think they're a powerful way to get feedback and to then kind of reiterate the assurances and instructional model for all of the programs. And so it's in lieu of the fall DLI conference, and so our DLI council. So we'd like to continue to work with the school districts and get dates to be able to come out and do that. Anything from LEAs? Anything from your school district, projects that you're working on or would want to share? A lot of you are saying, don't say anything. Any? Okay, great.
Well, no, it's just on the next one. Are you getting to the other
items.
questions?
Go for it.
I just had a teacher tell me that the USBE was offering a DLI Foundations course next summer. Do you have that?
USBE?
Yes, and so that's why I was like, they were saying that there was one being offered in the summer, 7-week course?
There is. There was. Last year we did a pilot through UVU, and it was through Alan Smith. He was the instructor who has been an instructor before, and it went really well. It was done through Alpine School District. We're also working with Greg Roberts and Davis School District to we can offer that if other school districts have interest. We need to work together on finding a qualified and experienced instructor on this course, and you can contact me if you're interested.
Summer versus the fall. So there isn't one that you know of scheduled anywhere for next summer?
Yet. Probably in Alpine again. Permission for Alan to do that again in Alpine. I'm working with John Allen from UVU to get that taken care of.
Granite will contact you. We need to do that because we're paying for our teachers.
Great. Any other questions? Yes.
When's the RFP due this year for new schools?
We'll be sending that out about mid-November, just before ACCO. We'll be sending that the RFP.
So you'll send it out then, and when will it be due?
It will be due by the 15th of December. We will review them in January and give you information about the middle of January, whether it's been approved or not.